it's Kim here, the Kiwi Health Detective, root cause and lifestyle medicine practitioner. And today I want to talk about sick food. And I'm not talking about food in the sense of it being sick in the current meaning of the word, which means, hey, that's sick, that's really good. I'm talking literally about how our food is sick and it is making us sick. And I'm wondering how many of you go around the supermarket these days and there is less and less that you can actually buy and eat. Because that's certainly what I've been finding over the past few years. So I just went to the supermarket, and as I was walking around wanting to buy some food, there were two main reasons that were preventing me from being able to buy or choosing not to buy probably over 99% of what was available in the supermarket. And that was the local supermarket where I live, which is a very small supermarket. It's quite new, but as I walk around, I can literally only put less than 1% of what is in there to choose from in my basket. And there are two core reasons. One is because of the levels of toxicity and utter rubbish that is meant to be food. And the second reason is the price. So there may be some things that I would like to buy, but I refuse to pay the price that they're asking. So how many people are actually really stopping and asking themselves what is happening to our food and what has been happening for many years now? And really it started decades ago. Just recently, I watched a very interesting documentary on the BBC called Irresistible. And it's the story of why food has become so addictive and how food manufacturers and food technicians spend millions of dollars making food addictive and irresistible. And a lot of this food is what is called ultra-processed food. So it's more than just processed and packaged, it's ultra-processed food, which is the worst kind of food that we can put in our body. In fact, it's not food anymore. And in the documentary, they talked about sound engineers and how sound engineers are employed to make the sound of opening a packet of crisps or a packet of biscuits or a tin can or a drink that's in a can. They are literally employed to make the sound more appealing so that you're more likely to buy that product after seeing it advertised on the television, for example. And food scientists calculate what is called the bliss point, the point at which, for example, there's not too little sugar and there's not too much sugar in a product. There's just the perfect amount of sugar that you'll just want to keep eating those biscuits until you finish the packet. And over the years, I've spent a lot more time looking at the labels on food. And what is really interesting is noticing how many more toxic ingredients are added in to the same foods which a few years ago did not have as many toxic ingredients. For example, occasionally I used to like eating an ice cream in New Zealand here, which is called a Magnum ice cream. And originally, when that ice cream was made, I don't know if it was like 10 years ago that it was first came out, I'm not sure. But when it was first made, it would have cream and milk and chocolate and some sugar and almonds. And that was more or less what the ingredients were. But now if you look at the back of one of these ice creams, you look at the ingredients list, there's several more ingredients and they are all completely toxic. Things like dextrose or maltodextrin or glucose syrup or all sorts of nasty sugary things. And one of the positives out of reading these ingredient lists is that over the years, it has quite literally stopped me eating unhealthy food. So I grew up as a kid getting into chocolate very early on. Chocolate and crisps was my thing as a kid, and it was definitely comfort eating. Even from a very early age, maybe around 6 or 8 years old, I remember crawling around under the dining room table, sneaking Quality Street out of the tin. And over the years at Christmas, I would eat a lot of Quality Street, but I'd never look at the ingredient list back then. But more recently, in the last few years, I've really come to always look at the ingredient list before I put something in my shopping basket. And it has been very useful at putting me off eating a lot of food, which otherwise I might have allowed myself to eat. So now I just do not eat biscuits and cakes and crisps and nachos, these sort of things that I used to love eating, because just reading the ingredients list is enough to put me off. So it does have a plus, I have to say, when one chooses to read the ingredients and think, no way am I going to put that in my body, because it literally clogs our cells up and our tissues and our organs, and it accumulates and builds up over the years. And most packaged foods are absolutely full of additives, preservatives. They've been treated with herbicides and pesticides when they were grown. More and more GMO foods being used, full of colorings, ultra-processed. Even fresh fruit is looking sick. I walk around the supermarket and the fruit literally looks ill. And that's what I mean by sick. It literally looks ill. It has been picked before it was ripe. It's been stored in cold stores for weeks or months. And then they put it out on the shelves and there is no nutrition anymore. It doesn't smell good and it tastes pretty disgusting. So sadly, it is not just the packaged and ultra-processed foods that are full of toxins and creating a huge amount of toxicity inside our body. It is also the fresh fruit and vegetables, which really, it's criminal what some of these supermarkets do in their advertising when they show you all this beautiful fresh produce in their adverts, and then you go into the supermarket and you're just walking past a whole load of dead food. Now, another thing to really consider is any fruit or vegetables that have been imported into the country in New Zealand, and really predominantly talking more fruit here than vegetables, that fruit that has been imported is put into huge vats of chemicals and so-called purified or cleaned before it actually gets onto the shelves. And I remember being told this when I was on a fasting retreat some years ago. And this lady said, if you actually saw what they do when they bring the food in or the fruit in and they put them in these vats of chemicals to clean them, you would never touch another pineapple again. And I have to say, I've never forgotten that. And when I do look at imported fruit, I always consider that, and it does put me off buying it. So down here where I live in the South Island in New Zealand, we have this amazing, staggeringly beautiful scenery. It's the most beautiful place in the world. And New Zealand has this clean green image that other people in other countries think, oh wow, New Zealand is just the perfect place to live. But since moving to the South Island, I have found it harder and harder to buy decent food. And whether that's packaged food or fresh food, it is getting harder and harder. For example, there are monopolies in the supermarkets here. So where I live, there is only one brand of supermarket in the town, and it is full of packaged processed foods. And we don't have any farmers markets, so there is nowhere to go to buy really decent fresh vegetables. And yes, of course, one can grow one's own vegetables, but even that hasn't been easy, and it is harder down here than in the North Island because of the climate and the rainfall, etc., etc. So it really is getting harder and harder to get decent food and to eat well. And I remember many years ago when I was at a Qigong retreat, this is probably back in about 2012, and one of the techniques that we were being taught was how to eat qi, how to harness prana or qi or energy in order to nourish oneself. And more I think to myself, gosh, maybe I'm actually going to have to go back to those videos and have a look at them and start training myself on how to do this. Because even though we were taught how to do it, I never actually practiced it. There are people who live on just energy or prana, but a very, very small number of people in general in the world doing that. And it takes quite some skill and practice to be able to do it properly. But with the quality of the food and also the water deteriorating more and more in this clean green country, one has to really ask oneself, where is this going and how can we turn this around? Now, normally in my podcasts, I always have solutions. When I'm talking about how to take care of one's own health, one's mental health, one's emotional well-being, how to reduce symptoms, I have a lot of answers and techniques and strategies and solutions for that. But this food issue, which is a nationwide and a global issue, I honestly don't have the answers. And I'm really wondering what it's going to take to turn this around. Now, we know that Robert Kennedy Jr. over in the States, the new health minister, he is really wanting to turn this around. He has been talking for years that the food situation in the States needs to be turned around, that a lot of toxic substances need to be taken out of food. And hopefully, who knows, maybe that could have a positive knock-on effect here in New Zealand, and some politicians could decide, okay, yeah, we need to do that as well. But at the moment, I don't see that happening here. We do have a bill in Parliament at the moment where they're wanting to deregulate GMO food. In other words, they're wanting to not have to label whether food is GMO or not. Because up until now, if food ingredients are GMO, they have to be labeled. And there is right now, as I'm speaking and doing this podcast, the government are trying to change that. They're wanting to deregulate so that nobody has to say whether the food they're producing is GMO or not, which is another catastrophe in the making. And also right now, there are many people around New Zealand battling councils who are starting to fluoridate because the government has told the councils that they must start putting fluoride in the water. Now, this is simply insane. Fluoride is an industrial poison, and yet they want to put it in the water. And unfortunately and sadly, a couple of councils have already capitulated because they were threatened with such huge fines. But this is the sort of thing that is going on in the world at the moment. People's interests are not being put first. Our health and what is needed to help us stay healthy are not being put first. And the government is not hearing what the people are saying and what they are saying they need. And it's really quite criminal. I don't understand how a governing body who are meant to support and nurture the populace can be so ignorant of what is really needed and really healthy. So coming back to where I started this podcast and what I was talking about at the start, more and more I'm finding that there are less and less food items that I am able to purchase to eat. And one of the reasons is because a year and a half ago, I made a very, very solid decision to stop eating processed sugar and also massively cut down on carbohydrates. And the reason that I decided to do that was because I started to experience brain fog, and I knew that it was connected with my gut not being able to process processed sugar and carbohydrates like it used to be able to. And interestingly, in the Irresistible documentary, they mentioned that this push to put more and more sugar and unhealthy fats and carbohydrates into the food system started back in the 70s. And of course, that was the prime time for me. I was growing up, I was a kid, and I turned to it for comfort eating, but also I turned to it because we were being advertised it. We were being encouraged to go out and buy and eat this food. And so I did because I didn't know better. But since I decided a year and a half ago to make a really concerted effort and really commit to not eating processed sugar or carbohydrates or a lot of these toxic ingredients in biscuits and chips and nachos that I used to eat, and along with the fact that they're putting more and more toxic ingredients into foods which previously did not have those ingredients, it is getting harder and harder to be able to go into a supermarket and buy decent food. And certainly that is the case for New Zealand, and certainly it is the case for the South Island, where our fruit and veggie in the area where I live is definitely lacking. So I know that this has been a bit of a ramble and a rant, but I'm just interested in how have you been experiencing the food situation in the last few years? Are you finding it more difficult to eat healthy, either because the ingredients aren't good or because of the increasing price? And what is it that we're going to do collectively to turn this around? What is it going to take to turn this around? Because if we continue on this trajectory, we are going to get sicker and sicker, and we will kill ourselves off. So something has to be done to turn it around. And yes, I know that growing one's own food, one's own fruit and veggies, is a big step in the right direction. Of course, it takes a lot longer to grow fruit because it takes a long time for fruit trees to grow. It's quite easy to grow green veggies, for example, or other veggies as well. So, of course, that is a solution. But apart from that, what are we as a nation and as a world population, what are we going to do to turn this around? So I leave that with you to contemplate. So until the next podcast, this is Kim Knight, the Kiwi Health Detective, root cause and lifestyle medicine practitioner, signing off.